We're Glenview Group, based in Pasadena, California, but now it doesn't really matter where we're based since we are all working virtually due to the shutdown. So the idea for this webinar and the webinar week is really to dive into ISO management systems and what are the processes that we have within ISO to help us manage changes resulting from COVID-19. And so in doing so, we'll go through the ISO approach, the PlanDoCheckAct. We will go through some of the general requirements mapped out in all of the ISOs, really, all the way from the context of the organization through planning, implementation, internal audits, and corrective actions. And again, this is going to be a high level, but the idea is to take a look at the management systems holistically and take a look at how we can apply this approach to COVID-19. Then we're going to dive in a little bit deeper to take a look at applying this PlanDoCheckAct to general safety practices for COVID-19. And then, of course, take a look at what can we use within PlanDoCheckAct when it comes to business development. So, PlanDoCheckAct model is a circular model, right? So the idea is whether it is ISO 9001, ISO 14001, ISO 27001, ISO 45001, ISO 13485. And so these are all either quality, environmental, health and safety, or quality management system for medical devices, or information security management. The first thing happens is that we have a management commitment. We have the initiative, right? Or we have the customer requirement, or we have a compliance, a regulatory requirement that initiates the action, or in this case, that we have COVID-19 and the pandemic, it's an event. So these are the kinds of, this would be the primary input into the planning process, right? So the way that every ISO is structured is that we first do our planning, right? So on the top management level, we're going to define what our policies are. We're going to take a look at risk assessment. And at this point in the risk assessment can be done a few different ways. It can be done on organizational level or on departmental level, which is then going to feed into what type of documents and policies we need to write in order to minimize our risks. Change management process is part of the planning, and this is going to be initiated because of this event, right? So that's also part of the planning section. During the planning, we also take a look at what are the equipment, tools, and personal protective equipment that we have. And then, of course, the training, because training is a primary action within this planning portion, because that initiates the implementation, right? So this is where we go into doing. So we do plan, do, and the doing, it really is performing the activities or the jobs and recording the activities on the jobs. So a lot of most of the work with most of the ISOs is done in the planning stages and in implementation stage. So the implementation stages, this is where we make sure that what we have written in our policies and procedures, we then perform on our operations floor or in the laboratory or within the services that we're providing our customers. Once we do implement, then there is a check section, and this is where we monitor and measure either with objectives and key performance indicators to make sure that the activities that we have defined and implemented do meet the goal of the organization, which is either customer satisfaction, customer retention, increase of the revenue. And in this case, with COVID-19, of course, is to minimize the risk to health and safety. Then in the check portion, also we have an internal audit and we have management review. Through internal audits, we then take a look at, we have an independent party that comes in and then takes a look at whether the organization is adhering to the procedures and policies that they have documented. And of course, then we take a look at what are the objectives and the monitoring measurement that they have applied, and if the implementation of the system is effective. And then depending on the results of the check section, we then go into the corrective actions, incident management, and improvement. So this is a very important section of the kind of a key, right? Because this kind of brings it to the closed loop where we take a look at if we have any deficiencies or if we see any improvements that we can do, we do it through the corrective action, incident management, and improvement. And then kind of brings us back to the beginning, where then we take a look at our initiatives, our policies. Do we want to make changes? Do we need to make changes? And again, we go back into the loop of the planning, doing, check, and act. So that's kind of a overview of the Plan, Do, Check, Act for all the ISOs. Does anybody have any questions at this time?
In what time normally this loop takes on? Is 1 year? Is a yearly review for the whole loop?
You mean when? So actually, Marcelo, this loop can be initiated at any time, right? So this is why we're taking a look at it now and applying it to COVID-19. When you first initially start implementing any management system, this is what you're going to initiate. But then every time every time that you are doing a monitoring and measurement, and let's say you don't meet your objective, then you would initiate a corrective action that then is going to be applied to that specific process. And then you're going to take a look at the risk assessment related to that process. Do you need to initiate a change management within that process? Do you need to update the documents for that process? So in a sense, this Plan, Do, Check, Act is a high level ISO approach that then is applied on every level depending on what is the situation that you're looking at. And the reason why this is applied is because it's a perfect closed loop, because at the end of the day, we really want to make sure that whatever we are documenting, whatever we are implementing is effective in the long run. And the only way to do this is if we go through and make sure that we have taken consideration all of the risks, all of the resources, all of the training. And so really it can be applied at any time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. So here we are utilizing Plan, Do, Check, Act for COVID-19 responses, COVID-19 response. So if you're certified to any of the standards mentioned, you already have a framework in place, right? So first thing, it really is to take a look at your context of the organization and review your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. One of the things that we're going to be talking about a little bit later on is the challenges that the business development faces, right? So this would be the start where business development is going to take a look at the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats. And this is going to feed in potential pivoting and potential updates to the scope of your business. And this is what the next point talks about, right? Review and update your context of the organization to ensure it includes the scope of the business and current market opportunities and threats. Do you need to pivot? Can you pivot? What are the external issues stemming from this pandemic? What is this status within the economy, the supply chain? And what are the internal issues related to safety, workspace? Is your workspace crammed? Do you need to take consideration shifts? Remote work, where does the remote work and social distancing, and then of course break rooms and etc. Okay. So planning business changes amid COVID-19. So this is what we already talked about, right? Relevant interested parties would be your shareholders, employees, regulators. How have their interests changed during the pandemic? So these are some of the questions that you're going to be taking a look at when we're looking at the context of the organization, right? Where is your business today? And what are the interested parties? Are you an essential business, but your customers are closed, right? So depending on what industry you're in, your actual customers may have to keep their doors shut, and they are no longer working in offices, so maybe they don't need your services. So all of these things have to be taken into consideration as moving forward. And is it appropriate to do a full SWOT and revise the scope to reflect the new way of operating the business? And please, if so, document. I know that, as we are going through any kind of shake in our businesses, we are doing the risk assessment, we are making the changes, and it is so hard to stop and document all of these things, and that's okay, but we are hoping that by having this conversation with you, that at least at the back of your mind you're going to have, oh, I have to document this, or at least have a pen and paper to do items saying, oh, I need to go back and, this is a change management. Oh, this is an preventative action. Or, I need to talk to this person to update this document. And it's really hard to sit down and do it when you are on the go and you are, in a firefighting mode. But it is very important to document these things, because then we can go back into the PDCA and really document and flesh it out to make sure that the changes that we're making are effective. And then, of course, nothing can happen without leadership, right? So we have to make sure to take a look at who is our leadership and what are they committed to in terms of sustaining the business, worker health and safety, as well as information security during this time. Right? So all of these, and especially if we are now going to work remotely, what are the issues related to information security? So again, as we're going through these changes, at least you can have a bullet point list somewhere, writing it down what you are working on changing. Any questions at this time?
I was just going to say that if you want to see the chat box, you need to exit the full screen mode. So press the minimize button in the middle in order to see the chat box on the right-hand side.
Are you talking to me or everybody else?
Just everyone.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mike. Okay, so risk assessment, effects of COVID-19 on business operation. So these are some of the questions so you take a look at your risk assessment, and again, this is more of a high-level risk assessment. This is not necessarily a risk assessment, for example, for your environmental aspects or health and safety risks or information security risks. Depending on how you have organized your risk assessment, it can either be one major risk assessment database, or you have broken it down by different areas. But the questions here are more kind of a general business risk assessment to take a look at, because now our health and safety need to be considered within our quality management system. So take a look at the current risks that you have. What are the risks of COVID-19 that are relevant to your organization? How can you prevent these types of risks? And take into consideration health, safety, as well as business, the loss of customers, the retention of customers, loss of revenue, and then what controls are proper. So given the risks that you're having, what are the controls that are best practices for you? And then think about, should visitors be disallowed during this time? Who are essential visitors? Do you need to have visitors within your facility? And are there any opportunities to capture, right? So now we're going to business development. What are the opportunities that we can capture if you're an essential business? How can you, and your customers are not working, how can you pivot? Let's take a look at, it says, yes, you will get Danny, no problem. You will get a copy of the PowerPoint, everybody that's attending. And also we are recording the session. So, this is going to be available in about a week once everything renders for you to share. And so again, are there any opportunities to capture? Other businesses may not be operating while you are, and you can seize these opportunities, right? Or are there any long-awaited projects that you haven't worked on yet, right? What type of savings can you have what kind of savings can you have in the future, given that, if your work can be done remotely, right? So all of these organizations now, such as, let's say, okay, banks or something, they can see, or investment firms, they see that all of the work can be done remotely. So they're going to be saving a lot of money on all of the leased space that they have in major cities, which then means that they're not going to have to be paying for a lot of amenities within these offices. So take a look at what kind of savings can you have in the future, given the shift in the work structure. And then planning of changes and change management. Here how can you plan to move forward with the changes due to COVID-19? What are the risks? And then what are the resources required, right? So now we've already talked about what are the risks to consider, what you're working with, and now really this is where the documentation comes into place, right? This is where you pulled out your change management database and you start writing it down, and you are documenting this. what are the resources required, and how can you properly plan and implement the changes? Who is the team? Who are the team members that are going to be on your team? Let's take a look at, I think we had a chat. Let's see. Nope. Asal, what is the chat? I can't pull it up on my screen.
That was actually from me.
Okay.
Thank you so much for giving me your email. I'm going to add you to the distribution list.
Okay, cool. And so planning for resources and keeping safe. So again, this is all part of the planning portion of the PlanDoCheckAct, right? So the resources, so we talked about all of the changes within the business, the risk assessment, the change management. And now once we go through the first portion of our planning, we have to take a look at what are the resources that we need to operate. What is the additional equipment and personal protective equipment? What is the type of training that we need? And the communication. How can we effectively communicate COVID-19 response plan internally and externally in order to ensure that we are now internalizing these changes that we have to make. And so we're going to be diving in a little bit more into COVID-19 safety protocols, but in terms of the ISOs, right? ISO 14001 and 45001 specifically call out the requirement for emergency preparedness and response. And so given the fact that you're going through the changes and documenting the risks, well, you probably will be led to take a look at your emergency action plan and to take a look at, sure, you need to write in what is your response should somebody say that they are feeling the symptoms, but then at the same time, do we really need to take a look at any other potential epidemics, pandemics, or widespread diseases and illnesses? And if so, then what are the controls that we have in place to respond to something like that? Do we have a disaster recovery plan? If we do, then we need to update it. But if we don't have it, then do we need to create one, right? So taking a look at the situation that we have at hand right now, if we need to respond to it, but because we are going through the PlanDoCheckAct and we are taking a look at all of the risks and all of the potential risks, it is taking us down the road to plan for future instances of a disaster. Nobody wants that, but we should be ready for it. And then, of course, do we have a business continuity plan? Do we need to document it? And this would really be helpful because depending on what the changes of the scope that you may be documenting, also what are the potential changes in leadership in the future, how you can make sure that the business continues and you are meeting the requirements of your customers as well as legal and regulatory requirements. So these are the kinds of things that following PlanDoCheckAct is going to take you to. And then, of course, we need to take a look at what is your supply chain? Is your supply chain available? Are they open? What is the availability of the supplies that you need? Right now, depending on what your operation is, or what you determine what is the best PPE for you, and you decide that N95 masks are required in order to break social distancing protocols, well, then we really need to take a look at what is the supply chain, what does the supply chain looks like? Are these available? Any questions right now? And monitoring and measurement. So this is where it's again based on risk assessment, and you will know if you need to measure the temperature of employees, housekeeping, in common areas and restrooms, visitor and contractor access and activities. Also, in terms of you would have to observe personnel to make sure that they are following set guidelines. I'm not saying to police, right? That's not the kind of thing, but depending on what your requirements are in terms of the masks or in terms of social distancing, or making sure that the tools and the workstations are disinfected appropriately, there needs to be some kind of a form of observation, just to make sure that you're minimize any kind of health risks. And of course, we have to make sure that our corrective actions and incident reporting process is in place and it's effective. And so this kind of brings it, brings the PDCA, and I goes back through, it kind of summarizes what I just went through. So the event that we talked about is COVID-19. And then we went through the plan. You did the risk assessment related to possible business shutdown. Are your customers closed down? Oh, nope, back. Loss of revenue, loss of workforce, and then the planning, the change management, right? Documenting what are the changes that you need to do within your organization, and outlining the plan on how you will approach these changes. And then maybe one of the best things to do would be to survey your customers to see whether they're open, what kind of services they need. Can you pivot, given the resources that you already have? Can you pivot to service the customers, their current needs? And then, of course, plan. Document COVID-19 safety practices, update any kind of operational documents, notify customers, make sure that you provide necessary equipment, tools, and personal protective equipment, as well as training to your personnel. And then this is where, we're implementing these safety practices. And we are then going to be checking or monitoring and measuring these types of the implementation, right? Not to say you need to measure temperatures at the beginning of every shift, but maybe you can ask the personnel before they leave home to measure their temperature. Again, depending on how severe the situation is in your areas. And then corrective actions, implementing corrective actions depending on the monitoring and measurement of your system. So right now we're going to go into a little bit of more details, what kind of controls to put in place related to COVID-19. But do you guys have any questions right now? Okay. So COVID-19 and interested parties. So so this is kind of going a little bit more deeper in, right? So each level we go a little bit deeper. So this is where we need to take into consideration employees, on-site contractors, and external providers, visitors, customers, and some of the controls, right? To take into consideration. Pre-shift wellness check, on-site wellness check. So the pre-shift would be probably done at home. You would have a set of 4 to 5 questions to recommend your personnel to take, to consider before getting in the car. And then so those are the same questions that you would be looking at for the on-site wellness check. Then shift protocols, hygiene guidelines, facial hair guidelines, prioritizing virtual interaction. And then what are the emergency response that you have should somebody report symptoms when they are at work? How to handle those. And then protocols for need to breach physical distancing, special respirators, face covers, gloves, and so yeah, for those kind of controls. Then entrance and exits, right? So when you take a look at your facility maps, assign employee exits. Maybe we need to modify your break, lunch, and common areas. What is happening in the break room, what is happening in the parking lot. Do you need to do shifts? Maybe you will have certain departments come in, or certain personnel come in on Monday, Tuesday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and some personnel are going to come on Fridays and on Tuesdays, Thursdays. How are you going to break this up? Housekeeping should probably done pre-shift as well as post-shift, or even in between the breaks, right? And then the restrooms, should you have one person per at a time rule? Again, that's something to take into consideration depending on the risks assessment that you will do. And further into controls to consider, the meals. Are they going to be bringing home meals or box meals? What is going to be happening with water? Are you going to have water dispensers, or are you going to provide bottled water yourself? And then the same thing, is the organization providing coffee and snacks, or are they, or personnel are going to be allowed to bring this from home? Then we're going to take a look at commonly used appliances, refrigerator, microwave, coffee pot. What is the rules on cleaning these? So these are all of the controls, potential controls to take into consideration. And then based on that, we need to then document. Right, we're going to draft the processes and procedures for pre-shift, on-site, emergency response, injury and illness prevention programs. Do you have them? Do they need to update it? And of course, making sure that your risk assessment documents that you have taken into consideration these types of risks. Again, so this is just kind of different types of personal protective equipment that you can take into consideration. Face masks, face shields, respirators, or maybe just cloth masks. Again, if your personnel are already separated, maybe cloth masks or just face covering is enough. Then cleaning and disinfecting, hardware, software. Considerations if personnel are working remotely, telephone systems, how does that work for organizations that have call centers? And then of course, do you need to purchase thermometers? Any questions at this time? Okay. And so this is where we're going into the implementation, the training, whether it's virtual or on-site, safety alerts, personal protective equipment, visitor check-ins, and of course, providing employees with any necessary contact information. So before we go into customers, I only have a couple of slides for customers, but anybody have any questions on COVID-19 safety practices right now? Okay. Well, we already talked about this. I already touched on this to take into consideration. Are you an essential business? Are your products and services still in demand? What is the main trend you foresee in your industry? Do you need to pivot? Can you pivot? And so this is kind of going into PlanDoCheckAct for business development. But before I go into this, we have seen lots of, for example, designer designer clothing companies that have started producing masks, right? So they pivoted in order to provide the customers, or even to expand their customers to general population. So they took take a look at what are the resources that they have, and they have repurposed them to start making masks. We've also seen some of our customers going into, assembling ventilators, depending on what your resources are, what is your supply chain looks like, maybe you can even pivot to a different industry depending on what is the competency of the personnel that you have within your organization. So these are all kinds of things to take into consideration as you are taking a look at the context of your organization, your strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats of the current market, the interested parties, and then this is maybe what I talked about earlier, surveying your customers, and then of course taking a look at legal and other requirements. And then change management, document. Again, if you know me, I always ask, did you write it down? But right now is not the time to say, did you write it down? It's just something to come back to, provided that we have the time, our anxieties are low, and we are really ready to get back and approach our business in a structural method, like PlanDoCheckAct. So change management, this is where we would be documenting any changes to our scopes and products and services that we are offering. And then, of course, this is where we're going to be planning, right? Reviewing current procedures and processes, what needs to be updated, and training, and then doing. Now, when it comes to business development, we really need to take a look at where is our marketing. Do we need to assign somebody for social media to do outreach, to advertise? What are the type of products and services you're offering now? How do you access more general population or the different market and the different industry you want to go into? What is the training that you need to do for your sales team? Maybe they have a lot of inputs to the changes that you want to implement. And then, of course, notifying the customers. And this is where we're going to doing the checking. When it comes to business development, we're going to be focusing on customer satisfaction. And so if we have already surveyed our customers and they responded to us and they said that this is the type of service that I want, this is the kind of product I'm looking for. Once you provide those types of services and products, then you want to tap those customers back and say, are you satisfied? Or do you have any other maybe suggestions for improvement for me? And then, of course, we're going into ACT in terms of corrective actions, incident management, and improvements. Any questions here? Okay. So this is summary. We have PlanDoCheckAct can be applied to any industry, organization, department, process, and event. It doesn't matter whether you have ISO system certified or not. It really doesn't. It's just an approach to that can be applied to any business to ensure, effective implementation and, at the end of the day, customer retention and survival. And then we looked at COVID-19 safety practices. We went over some of the best practices and taking into consideration of providing of the PPE and adjusting the operations in order to minimize health and safety risks. And for business development, we talked about interviewing customers, utilizing resources and risk assessment, reviewing your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, updating scope if needed, that is if you pivoted. And so that brings us to the end of our presentation. So I'm going to go out of this. Do you have any questions, anybody? Okay, we will take a look at the chat section. And if you have any questions, you can actually also email us directly, and we will be answering any questions as a result from this training or this webinar. And then we'll try our best to help you. But I think some of you have already registered for upcoming webinars as well that we have this week. So today we went over getting back to business. Tomorrow, Mike is going to be presenting ISO 45001 Health and Safety Management Systems. And on Wednesday, he will be presenting on Information Security Management System. And on Thursday, we have 2 sessions. Mike will be going over R2 version 3, which is Responsible Recycling Standard. And I will be going over AS9100 Quality Management System. And on Friday, I will go over ISO 13485 Quality Management System for medical industry. So if you haven't already registered for these sessions, please do. If you need the link again, email us or chat us. We can send you the link again, as well as the code to register for free. And again, contact us if you have any questions. Let's take a look at, let's see, chat. Okay. When will Glenview be ready to make on-site visits? Well, Danny, right now our policy actually is to, right now our policy is to follow what CDC as well as LA County has recommended to us. And right now the shutdown, I think, is extended through the summer. So right now our plan is to do our work remotely or virtually, which we have been very effective at. And actually I can see that we have one of our customers that we did virtual audits starting as early as November of 2018. And we have been very effective at doing our audits virtually since 2018, and provided that our customers are cooperating. So we know that our customers want us to be effective consultants. So when we say, can you please point the camera this way? They do point the camera this way. And so we do take, we are able to be effective in our findings, and all of our customers are open with us. So in terms of us working virtually, we had no issues in the past, and we don't foresee any issues in the future in terms of providing effective consulting in terms of ISO management systems. But again, everything is situational depending on, how many personnel you have at your facility, making sure that we can wear personal protective equipment, depending on type of operation you have. We do have some facilities that we have already used Tyvek suits for, as well as, N95 masks and the face shields. So again, right now, short answer is we are following what CDC and Los Angeles County have put in place for us. But again, depending on what the situation is, we can reconsider that.
Maya, there's a follow-up question Danny had with regard to PJR doing virtual audits. Do you see it?
Okay, so
I can answer that.
Yeah, Mike can answer that, but I actually have a customer that's doing a virtual audit in 2 weeks with PJR. But Mike, go ahead, answer that question.
So I think everything depends on the situation going forward. Each case is analyzed one by one. So for audits like in later June, It still hasn't been approved whether it's going to be virtual or whether it's going to be on site. So it's something that's fluid and it's changing. And you'll probably know whether your audit will be remote or virtual or on site at least like 2 to 3 weeks prior to your audit. But right now it seems like the rest of May and rest of June will likely be virtual or remote audits, but going forward, it depends on what state the world is in at that time.
Okay, very cool. And so we also have some references here from Cal OSHA, as well as CDC. Let's see. So again, this is going to be available for you to take. We can send a PDF of the presentation today, but then again, the recording is going to take some time to render and to make it available online. Again, if you have any questions at all, you can email us directly. This is our contact information here, and we will be happy to respond to any questions that you have. Thank you, everybody. Bye. See you soon.
See you tomorrow.
Yes, see you tomorrow. That's right. Okay, bye.